Kneeling beside a dying monster in the freezing woods, a banished healer risked everything she had left. Though stripped of her pack and dignity, Beatrice didn't hesitate to pull the silver from the beast's chest, completely unaware that her scarred, trembling hands now held the life of a cursed king. The winter of 1432 was merciless, yet the frostbite gnawing at Beatrice's fingers was nothing compared to the cold betrayal of her own kind. Born into the lower echelons of the Wycliffe pack, situated in the fortified medieval village of Highgrove, Beatrice Harding had never known the warmth of an alpha's favor. As an omega whose wolf spirit was too frail to shift, she was deemed useless in the hunting parties and border skirmishes. Instead, she had dedicated her life to the ancient arts of healing, learning from the dusty tomes of a wandering monk, Brother Thomas, and the whispered secrets of the forest. She knew the medicinal properties of every root, moss, and flower that grew within the shadow of the Wycliffe territory. She saved countless lives, setting shattered bones and brewing fever-breaking tinctures for the very warriors who openly mocked her existence. But gratitude is a fragile currency in the world of wolves. The true nightmare began on a howling night in late December. Lady Madeline, the fiercely proud mate of the pack alpha, Theron Wycliffe, went into premature labor. Beatrice was summoned to the royal chambers, her hands stained with the crushing of yarrow and motherwort. For 3 agonizing hours, Beatrice fought to save both mother and pup. However, what Beatrice didn't know was that Madeline's tea had been laced with a heavy dose of nightshade by Eleanor, the high-ranking pack midwife, who despised Beatrice's rising influence. When the pup was delivered stillborn, the room descended into a horrific, suffocating silence. Alpha. Theron's roar shook the stone foundations of the keep. Blinded by grief and fueled by Eleanor's venomous whispers, who hastily planted the remaining nightshade in Beatrice's apothecary satchel, Theron sought blood. He dragged Beatrice by her hair into the snowy courtyard, tossing her before the assembled pack. "You have poisoned my bloodline," Theron bellowed, his eyes flashing a murderous gold. "You, a weak, shiftless omega, dared to curse the Wycliffe name. I swear it on the goddess, Alpha. I did no such thing," Beatrice pleaded, the jagged ice of the courtyard biting into her bare knees. She looked around at the faces of the wolves she had healed. She saw Lord Godwinson, whose severed leg she had reattached. She saw young Arthur, whose life she had saved from winter fever just a fortnight ago. Not a single soul stepped forward. They looked away, their eyes heavy with the cowardice of pack submission. "Silence!" Eleanor spat from the steps, holding up the planted vial of nightshade. "The evidence is right here. The Omega is a witch, a blight upon our pack. She should be executed." Theron, breathing heavily, stepped forward. "Execution is too quick. She will suffer the fate of the forgotten." He unsheathed his silver-forged hunting dagger. Beatrice screamed as 2 guards pinned her down in the snow. Theron carved the rune of the Forsaken deep into her left shoulder, a jagged, bleeding brand that severed her magical tether to the pack. The pain was absolute, a blinding white funnel that radiated through her veins as her pack bond was violently snapped. "You are a rogue now," Theron growled, wiping the bloody dagger on his cloak. "You have until sundown to disappear into the Ironwood. If my scouts find you within our borders tomorrow, they will mount your head on a pike." Banished, bleeding, and stripped of her winter furs, Beatrice stumbled out of the iron gates of Highgrove. The Ironwood was a notorious death trap, a sprawling, endless labyrinth of ancient pines and predatory shadows where rogues went mead and wild beasts reigned. For 2 weeks, Beatrice defied the odds. She survived on her intimate knowledge of the wild, She bound her weeping shoulder wound with sphagnum moss and birch bark, fighting off the raging infection. She ate pine nuts, scavenged frozen berries, and slept in the hollowed-out trunks of dead oak trees, shivering so violently she thought her bones would shatter. She was no longer an Omega of the Wycliffe pack. She was a ghost, a broken healer, wandering the frozen purgatory of the medieval wilderness, waiting for the cold to finally claim her. But fate, it seemed, had a far more dangerous plan. A blizzard descended upon the Ironwood on the eve of the blood moon, burying the forest under feet of snow. Beatrice had managed to find refuge in a deep limestone cavern, a natural shelter shielded by heavy brambles. She was stoking a meager fire with trembling hands when the sound tore through the night. It wasn't a howl. It was a roar, a sound so primordial, so steeped in raw, agonizing power that it vibrated in Beatrice's chest. Her survival instincts screamed at her to extinguish the fire and hide in the darkest crevice of the cave. But then, a sharp, metallic tang drifted into the cavern on the freezing wind. It was the distinct smell of werewolf blood, mixed with the burning ozone scent of silver. Someone, or something, was dying a terrible death just outside her sanctuary. The healer's oath, a vow she had taken to the goddess long before Theron cast her out, pulled her to her feet. Grabbing her walking staff and her satchel of meager herbs, Beatrice stepped out into the raging storm. She followed the scent of blood and scorched flesh for nearly a mile until she reached a clearing. What she saw made her drop her staff in horror. The snow was painted crimson. Littered across the clearing were the mangled bodies of at least a dozen heavily armed men. They wore the dark iron armor and red tabards of the Royal Lycan Guard, the elite soldiers of the kingdom. They had been torn limb from limb, their silver swords and heavy crossbows shattered in the snow. In the center of the carnage lay the victor. It was a wolf, but of a monstrous, unbelievable scale. It was the size of a draft horse, its coat as black as the midnight sky, though it was now matted with blood. This was no ordinary werewolf. This was a Lycan of royal blood. But the beast was falling. 4 massive, silver-barbed bolts protruded from its ribs and shoulder, heavy, silver-laced iron chains, traps meant for a behemoth, were tangled around its hind legs, searing its flesh with every microscopic movement. The wolf was panting, its massive chest heaving erratically as the silver poisoning flooded its heart. As Beatrice took a tentative step forward, the monster's head snapped toward her. Its eyes were not the gold of a normal alpha, but a swirling, terrifying crimson. A deep, guttural snarl ripped from its throat, vibrating the very ground beneath her boots. "Shh," Beatrice whispered, raising her hands slowly, showing her empty palms. Fear threatened to paralyze her. The Wycliffe Alpha had broken her spirit, but this creature could break her in half with a single bite. Yet beneath the feral rage in those crimson eyes, Beatrice saw something she recognized intimately. Profound, blinding pain. "I am not going to hurt you," she said, her voice remarkably steady, despite the terror shaking her frame. "If I don't pull that silver out, your heart will stop before dawn." The great wolf snapped its jaws, trying to drag itself backward, but the chains held it fast. It let out a pathetic, whined gasp as the silver bolts dug deeper. Beatrice didn't hesitate anymore. She dropped to her knees beside the massive predator. The heat radiating off its body was intense, burning like a furnace in the blizzard. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a bundle of dried king's foil and crushed willow bark. "This is going to hurt," she warned softly. With a firm grip, Beatrice grabbed the shaft of the thickest crossbow bolt lodged in the beast's shoulder. The wolf tensed. She pulled. The beast roared in agony, snapping its massive jaws inches from Beatrice's face. The clack of its teeth sounded like a bear trap snapping shut. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't flinch. She pressed a handful of snow and king's foil directly into the smoking wound, muttering old Latin healing incantations Brother Thomas had taught her. For the next 2 hours, under the shadow of the blizzard, the banished healer went to work. She extracted 3 more silver bolts, her hands burning from the contact with the toxic metal. She used a discarded iron short sword from one of the dead guards to pry open the heavy silver chains binding the creature's legs. Through it all, the terrifying beast watched her. Its crimson eyes never left her face. It stopped snapping, eventually laying its massive head in the blood-soaked snow, submitting to the agonizing ministrations of the fragile human-looking Omega. When the last chain was broken, and the final wound packed with moss and herbs, Beatrice collapsed backward in the snow, utterly exhausted. Her hands were blistered and stained black with silver ash and blood. "You'll live," she breathed out, a weak smile touching her frozen lips. She dragged the beast's heavy, lethargic body under the thick canopy of a sweeping spruce tree to shield it from the snow, huddling beside it to share its immense body heat. Exhaustion finally claimed her, and the healer fell into a deep, dreamless sleep against the flank of the monster. When Beatrice awoke, the blizzard had passed. Pale morning sunlight was filtering through the pines. She shifted, expecting to feel the coarse black fur of the giant wolf. Instead, her hand brushed against warm, bare human skin. Beatrice gasped and scrambled backward, hitting the trunk of a tree. Where the monstrous wolf had lain, there was now a man. He was naked, broad-shouldered, and heavily muscled, covered in old battle scars and fresh, crude bandages from Beatrice's handiwork. His dark hair was wild and damp with sweat. But it was the heavy gold signet ring on his right hand that made the blood drain entirely from Beatrice's face. The ring bore the crest of a roaring wolf clenching a crown. The Montgomery bloodline. This wasn't a rogue beast. This wasn't just an alpha. This was King Tristan Montgomery, the supreme ruler of the northern Lycan kingdoms. The king who, according to the whispers of the realm, was supposedly safely ruling from the Iron Throne in the capital. The king who was rumored to be afflicted by a dark, blood magic curse that stripped him of his humanity during the blood moon. As Beatrice stared in sheer terror, the man groaned. His heavy eyelids fluttered open. The feral crimson had vanished from his eyes, replaced by a piercing, calculating storm grey. Before Beatrice could even attempt to run, Tristan moved with terrifying, blinding speed. In a fraction of a second, his large, calloused hand shot out, wrapping securely around her throat and pinning her hard against the bark of the spruce tree. "Who are you?" King Tristan's voice was like grinding stone, dangerous and commanding. "And how much did Lord Reginald pay you to track me?" Beatrice choked, her feet dangling inches from the snow. She had survived her pack's betrayal and the deadly ironwood, only to be executed by the king she had just saved. Black spots danced at the edges of Beatrice's vision. The king's grip was like an iron vice, unyielding and lethal. She clawed at his thick forearm, her feet kicking helplessly against the trunk of the spruce tree. "Reginald," she choked out, her voice a fragile, broken wheeze. "I don't know him. Look at your chest. Look at my hands." Tristan's storm-grey eyes narrowed. He glanced down at his own torso. Where there should have been gaping, fatal wounds from the silver-barbed bolts, there were only crude, moss-packed bandages and angry red scars already knitting together with unnatural speed. He looked back at Beatrice, finally noticing her blistered, blood-stained fingers, blackened with toxic silver ash. A mercenary would have left the silver in his heart. A royal assassin would have severed his head while he slept. With a sharp intake of breath, Tristan released her. Beatrice collapsed into the snow, coughing violently, her hands clutching her bruised throat. "You pulled the silver from my flesh," Tristan stated, his deep voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and lingering suspicion. He crouched beside her, snatching her wrist before she could scramble away. His thumb brushed against the ragged fabric of her tunic, pulling it slightly to reveal the raw, weeping brand on her left shoulder. The king's breath hitched. The rune of the Forsaken. His gaze snapped to hers, the coldness in his eyes fracturing to reveal a glimmer of genuine shock. "You are an exile. From which pack?" "Wycliffe," Beatrice stammered, pulling her tunic up to hide her shame. "Alpha Theron banished me. 2 weeks ago." Tristan released her wrist and leaned back against the tree, letting out a dark, humorless bark of laughter that ended in a sharp groan of pain. He dragged a hand down his face. Of course my life is saved by a banished Wycliffe Omega. The goddess has a twisted sense of irony." "What does that mean?" Beatrice asked, her healer's instinct warring with her fear as she noticed a fresh line of blood seeping from his shoulder bandage. "It means, little healer, that your former Alpha, Theron, has just committed treason," Tristan growled, struggling to pull his stolen, bloodied cloak around his broad shoulders. "My uncle, Lord Reginald Montgomery, has spent the last year poisoning my court. When I discovered his treachery, he retaliated with black magic. He hired a coven of blood witches to curse my royal bloodline. Every full moon, I don't just shift, I lose my mind. I become a feral, mindless beast, slaughtering everything in my path." Beatrice shivered, remembering the primordial roar and the crimson eyes. "The men in the clearing, the royal guard?" "Reginald's loyalists," Tristan spat, his jaw clenching. "They tracked me during the blood moon, waiting for the curse to strip away my human intellect, so they could butcher me like a rabid dog. Reginald plans to take the Iron Throne, claiming I have gone mad. And to secure the Northern Kingdom, he has purchased the loyalty of the largest pack in the region, the Wycliffe pack." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Theron wasn't just a cruel alpha, he was a traitor to the crown. "I need to return to the capital," Tristan said, attempting to stand. His legs trembled, the lingering silver toxicity clearly ravaging his muscular frame. "I must rally the loyalist armies before Reginald is crowned." He took 2 steps and collapsed onto the snow, coughing up a spatter of dark blood. "You aren't going anywhere, Your Majesty," Beatrice said, her voice finding its familiar, steady cadence. The fear was ebbing, replaced by the clinical authority of a woman who had spent her life wrestling death for the souls of wolves. She crawled over to him, pressing her cold hands against his burning chest. "The silver is out, but the infection is deep. Your wolf is fighting the curse and the poison simultaneously. If you walk on that leg, your heart will rupture before nightfall." Tristan glared at her, but the defiance in her amber eyes was immovable. For the first time in his life, the king of the northern Lycan kingdoms submitted. For foot-grueling days, the cave became their entire world. Beatrice worked tirelessly. She boiled snow for pure water, redressed his wounds with fresh pine sap, and brewed bitter teas from hawthorn and birch to flush the silver from his liver. During those quiet, freezing nights, the silence between them gave way to whispers. Tristan watched her with a heavy, unreadable gaze as she worked. He noted the way she didn't flinch away from his gruesome scars, the gentle reverence she held for her herbs, and the tragic sadness that haunted her smiles. "Why did Theron brand you?" Tristan asked one evening, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his aristocratic features. Beatrice paused, her hands tightening around her wooden bowl. Slowly, the tragic tale spilled from her lips. Lady Madeline's stillborn pup, the planted nightshade, Eleanor's treacherous lies, and the cowardly silence of the pack she had dedicated her life to healing. When she finished, a heavy, suffocating aura filled the cavern. Tristan's eyes were glowing a faint, dangerous gold. It wasn't the feral crimson of the curse, but the righteous fury of an alpha king. "They threw you to the wolves," Tristan rumbled, his voice dark with a terrifying promise, "without realizing you were meant to rule them." Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. "I am just a broken Omega, Tristan." "You are a survivor, Beatrice," he corrected softly, reaching out. His large, warm hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she shed. "You saved a king when his own elite guard tried to slaughter him. You possess more strength in your scarred hands than Theron Wycliffe has in his entire miserable soul." The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to Beatrice's core. A dormant, suppressed part of her wolf spirit flared to life, singing a song of ancient, predestined recognition, the mate bond. She gasped, pulling back, her eyes wide. Tristan felt it too. His pupils dilated, the scent of rain, cedar, and crushed herbs filling his senses, drowning out the stench of blood and winter. But the tender moment was shattered by a brutal reality. Tristan suddenly convulsed, a horrific, unnatural cracking sound echoing from his spine. He screamed, clutching his chest as black veins spiderwebbed up his neck. "Tristan!" Beatrice cried out, holding him down. "The curse!" he gasped, his eyes flashing between storm grey and feral crimson. "It's the witch's magic. It wasn't just tied to the moon. It's tied to my life force. The silver weakened me. The curse is taking over permanently." Beatrice's mind raced through the hundreds of texts she had memorized from Brother Thomas. A blood magic curse of this magnitude required a specific binding agent to neutralize. "Sunstone ash," Beatrice whispered, realization dawned on her. "And the petals of the blood orchid. It can purge demonic magic from the bloodstream." "Blood orchids only grow in the high mountain sanctuaries," Tristan gritted out, fighting the beast within. "No," Beatrice said, her eyes hardening with sudden, terrifying resolve. "There is one other place, Lady Madeline's private conservatory inside the Highgrove Keep. I used to tend to them." Tristan looked at her, his breathing ragged. "Highgrove is heavily fortified. Theron will have 100 warriors stationed there. And if he finds you—" "If he finds me, I am dead," Beatrice finished. She stood up, grabbing her satchel. "But if we do nothing, you become a monster forever, and Reginald burns the kingdom. I am not letting you die, Tristan. Not after I just found you." The return to Highgrove felt like stepping into a waking nightmare. A week later, cloaked in heavy stolen traveller's furs, Beatrice and Tristan slipped through the village's western postern gate. The village was distracted. Theron was hosting a grand winter solstice feast in the Great Hall to celebrate his new alliance with Lord Reginald's emissaries. The sounds of raucous laughter, clashing tankards and roaring fires echoed through the snowy courtyard. Tristan was pale, leaning heavily on Beatrice as they moved through the shadows of the stone keep. The black veins of the curse had reached his jawline. Time was running out. Using her intimate knowledge of the keep's blind spots, Beatrice guided them to the glass-domed conservatory attached to the Alpha's private quarters. The heavy iron door was unlocked. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of exotic flora. There, Beatrice pointed to a stone pedestal in the center of the room. Resting in a silver basin was a cluster of stunning, crimson-petaled flowers. The blood orchids. She rushed forward, crushing the petals in her mortar and pestle, mixing them with a vial of purified holy water she had kept in her satchel. "Drink this," she urged, bringing the mixture to Tristan's pale lips. "Drink all of it." Tristan swallowed the bitter concoction. Almost immediately he dropped to his knees, gasping for air as a violent shudder racked his massive frame. Well, 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 look what the winter winds blew back into my territory. Beatrice froze. The mortar slipped from her hands, shattering on the stone floor. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor, the midwife, her face twisted in a wicked, triumphant sneer. Behind her, flanking the entrance, were 4 heavily armed Wycliffe warriors, and stepping through the center of them was Alpha Theron, dressed in his ceremonial furs, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I explicitly told you I would mount your head on a pike if you ever returned, Beatrice," Theron purred, drawing his silver hunting dagger. "And it seems you've brought a diseased rogue with you to share your fate." "He is not a rogue," Beatrice said, stepping in front of Tristan, shielding his convulsing body with her own. "Theron, you don't know what you are doing. Eleanor poisoned Lady Madeline. She framed me. If you let us go—" "Lies!" Eleanor shrieked. "She is a witch! Look at the rogue she brought. He reeks of dark magic. Kill them both, Alpha." "Gladly," Theron growled, stepping forward, his eyes locked on Beatrice's throat. "Your pathetic life ends tonight, Omega." Theron lunged, his dagger raised. Beatrice braced for the agonizing bite of the blade. It never came. A hand, large, steady, and vibrating with an ancient, catastrophic power, shot out from behind Beatrice and caught Theron's wrist mid-air. The sound of Theron's wrist bones shattering echoed like a gunshot in the glass room. Theron screamed, dropping the dagger. Tristan rose to his feet. The black veins had vanished from his neck. His posture was no longer slouched in pain, but rigidly upright, radiating an aura so oppressive, so devastatingly dominant, that the 4 Wycliffe warriors immediately dropped to their knees, whimpering in involuntary submission. Tristan's eyes were no longer the feral crimson of a cursed beast, nor the muted grey of a dying man. They were a blazing, incandescent royal gold. "You dare raise a blade to my mate?" Tristan's voice didn't just fill the room. It resonated in the very marrow of every wolf present. It was the alpha command of the Supreme King. Theron fell to his knees, clutching his broken wrist, his face drained of all blood. He looked at the heavy gold signet ring on Tristan's hand, the roaring wolf clenching a crown. Your Majesty," Theron stuttered, absolute terror widening his eyes. I did not know." "You knew enough to plot treason with my treacherous uncle," Tristan boomed, stepping over the shattered mortar. "You knew enough to cast out the only innocent soul in your rotting pack, a healer who possesses more honor in her severed pack bond than you have in your entire lineage." "Mercy, my king," Theron grovelled, pressing his forehead to the stone floor. "The time for mercy passed the night you branded her," Tristan said coldly. He turned his blazing gaze to Eleanor, who was trembling so violently she wet herself. "Guards of Wycliffe!" Tristan commanded, his voice echoing out into the courtyard. Within seconds, a dozen more warriors rushed into the conservatory, stopping dead in their tracks at the sight of their alpha grovelling before the legendary King Tristan. "Arrest this woman," Tristan pointed at Eleanor. "Throw her in the dungeons. She will confess to the poisoning of Lady Madeline under the royal interrogators." The guards immediately seized the screaming midwife, dragging her away. Tristan looked down at Theron. "By the power vested in me, by the goddess and the Iron Throne, I strip you of your alpha title, Theron Wycliffe. Your lands are forfeit. You will be sent to the Wall of Ice to serve the remainder of your miserable days in the vanguard. Take him out of my sight, Theron didn't even fight, as his own men hauled him to his feet and dragged him away, his empire crumbling to dust in the span of a single minute. Silence descended upon the conservatory. Tristan turned to Beatrice. The terrifying, oppressive aura vanished entirely, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering tenderness. He knelt before her, right there, amidst the shattered glass and crushed orchids. He took her small, scarred hands in his. "You saved my life, Beatrice Harding," Tristan whispered, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "You broke my curse. You braved death to save a man who had nothing but a crown of thorns to offer you." Tears streamed down Beatrice's face. "I am just a healer." "You are my mate," Tristan corrected, his eyes shining with unshed emotion. "And if you will have me, you are the queen of the northern Lycan kingdoms. I will spend the rest of my days making sure no one ever makes you feel broken again." Beatrice looked at the man who had been a monster, at the king who had been broken, and realized that together they were finally whole. She didn't need a pack to define her worth. She had forged her own destiny in the snow and blood of the ironwood. "I will have you, Tristan," she whispered, pulling him up into a kiss that sealed their fates, and the fate of the kingdom, forever. If Beatrice's incredible journey from a broken, banished healer to the powerful queen of the Lycan kingdoms captured your heart, don't keep this thrilling romance to yourself. Hit that like button, share this story with your fellow fantasy and romance lovers, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more epic werewolf dramas, royal betrayals, and fated mate tales. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Alpha Theron's downfall. Until next time, stay wild.